Young doctor changed bandage for female millionaire in a coma. Shockingly, she woke up and... Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. It all started in a quiet, sterile hospital room, where the soft hum of fluorescent lights echoed through the hallway of Westbridge Private Hospital. The air was thick with tension, a place where life and death often stood side by side. Dr. Ethan Hartley had just been assigned a new patient, one that would change everything. Sophie Langley, a successful businesswoman in her early 40s, was known to the world as a self-made millionaire, the kind of person whose name was frequently in the headlines. But today, she wasn't the powerful CEO that everyone admired. Instead, she was lying unconscious in a hospital bed, the result of a horrific car accident that had left her in a coma for over 2 weeks. Despite her wealth, Sophie's family had been absent, leaving the hospital staff to do their rounds out of obligation. When Dr. Hartley entered the room, he couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy for her. She was a woman who had everything, yet here she was, vulnerable, alone, and fighting for her life. His task was simple: change her bandages, monitor her vitals, and offer the care that every patient deserved. But something about her situation felt different. Perhaps it was the haunting stillness of the room or the fact that no one had come to visit her in days. As he changed the bandages on her injured arm, Dr. Hartley found himself talking to her, even though he knew she couldn't hear him. He spoke about his day, about the weather, anything to break the silence. But as he placed the fresh bandages on her wound, something strange happened. He could have sworn he saw her fingers twitch, just slightly. He paused, his heart racing. Was he imagining it? He leaned closer, his breath catching in his throat. The monitor next to her beeped in response, a steady, rhythmic pulse that seemed to echo the quiet hope in his chest. He didn't report it immediately. It could be nothing. He continued his work, trying to shake the unease that settled in his mind. As the night wore on, the routine of the hospital returned, but Dr. Hartley couldn't shake the feeling that something extraordinary was about to happen. He left the room that evening, but not without a lingering thought. Could it be possible that Sophie Langley, the woman who had everything, was still fighting to wake up? Only time would tell. But for now, Dr. Hartley couldn't help but hope. Asterisk. After that strange night, Dr. Ethan Hartley couldn't shake the feeling that something extraordinary was about to happen. The subtle twitch in Sophie Langley's fingers, the slight change in her vitals, all seemed too much to ignore. He spent the following days at her side, hoping to see a sign that she was beginning to wake up. But each time he checked her, Sophie remained the same, unresponsive, silent, a mystery trapped within her own body. Asterisk. Dr. Hartley's colleagues had dismissed his observations, chalking it up to wishful thinking. But Ethan knew what he had seen. He couldn't help but feel a connection to this woman. Despite her wealth, her powerful business empire, Sophie was now powerless, and all her riches meant nothing in the face of her coma. Each day, Ethan spent hours with her, changing her bandages, adjusting her IV, and talking to her. The hospital room had become his second home, the smell of antiseptic and the quiet hum of the machines, a constant presence. One day, after several weeks of routine care, Ethan was at her bedside when he noticed something even more remarkable. Sophie's hand twitched again, but this time it was more deliberate. Her fingers curled slightly, as if testing the waters of consciousness. He froze, watching in disbelief as her hand shifted again. Was it just another fluke? He placed his hand gently on hers, hoping for another sign. And then, it happened. Her eyes fluttered open. For a moment, everything stood still. Sophie's gaze met his, and for a brief second, there was recognition in her eyes. Ethan's heart raced as he watched her blink, slowly adjusting to the bright hospital lights. It was the first time in weeks that she had shown any sign of awareness. "You're awake," Ethan whispered, hardly believing it himself. Sophie's lips parted, and she tried to speak, but no words came out. Instead, she gave him a weak smile, as if trying to reassure him that she was okay. Ethan's mind raced with a mixture of emotions, relief, disbelief, and hope. "I'll get the doctor," he said quickly, but Sophie's hand tightened around his. She wasn't ready for him to leave. "Stay," she whispered, her voice hoarse. Ethan hesitated for a moment, then nodded. He stayed by her side, knowing that this moment was crucial. Sophie's awakening wasn't just a physical recovery, it was a breakthrough. She had been trapped in her own body, unable to communicate, unable to move. But now, after weeks of silence, there was hope. Over the next few hours, Sophie slowly regained her strength. She was still weak, her movements slow and uncoordinated. But there was something about her presence that filled the room with a sense of life. She was no longer the lifeless figure in the hospital bed. She was a woman who had come back from the brink. Sophie struggled to sit up, and with Ethan's help, she managed to prop herself up against the pillows. Her eyes scanned the room, taking in her surroundings for the first time in what felt like forever. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice soft but clear. "You're in the hospital," Ethan replied, his tone gentle. "You were in a car accident. You've been in a coma for a while." Sophie's brow furrowed as she tried to recall what had happened. "A car accident?" she repeated, her voice tinged with confusion. "How long?" "It's been over 2 weeks," Ethan said. Sophie's eyes widened. 2 weeks? I've been unconscious for 2 weeks? She looked down at her body, as if trying to make sense of everything. "You've been fighting," Ethan said, smiling reassuringly. "And you've made it. You're awake now." Sophie's eyes softened as she took in his words. She studied his face for a moment, as if trying to piece together the connection between them. "You're the doctor who's been taking care of me," she said slowly. Ethan nodded. "Yes, I'm Dr. Hartley. But I haven't been the only one taking care of you. Your nurses, your doctors, we've all been doing our best." Sophie's lips curled into a faint smile. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what to say." Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. It was rare for patients to express their gratitude in such a way, especially someone like Sophie Langley, a woman who had everything but had lost so much in the accident. He had heard of her before the ruthless CEO, the woman who had built an empire from the ground up. But now, she was just a woman, vulnerable, in need of care. "You don't have to say anything," Ethan replied, his voice steady. "You're here, and that's all that matters." Sophie nodded, still processing everything. Her eyes seemed distant for a moment, as if she were lost in thought. Ethan stayed close, offering her reassurance, but in his mind, he couldn't shake the nagging question. What had really happened to Sophie? The accident, her coma. It didn't add up. There was something more to her story, something she wasn't saying, and he was determined to find out what it was. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. The days following Sophie Langley's awakening were filled with a mixture of uncertainty and hope. As she slowly regained her strength, she struggled to come to terms with the reality of her situation. Dr. Ethan Hartley was by her side, offering both medical care and reassurance. But there was still so much about the accident that Sophie couldn't remember. Her mind was foggy, and the memories were fragmented, like pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit together. Sophie found herself wondering why she had been driving that night, what had led to the accident, and why no one had come to visit her. Her family, her business associates, where were they? It was as if they had all vanished. Asterisk, asterisk. Dr. Hartley, too, couldn't ignore the unsettling feeling that had settled in his chest. He had been taking care of Sophie for weeks. But every time he looked at her, he felt as if there were something missing. Something she wasn't telling him. It wasn't just the accident, it was the way she had reacted to the mention of her family. There was a deep sense of confusion in her eyes when he spoke of them. As Sophie recovered, Dr. Hartley began to push her for more information, gently encouraging her to remember what had happened. She could recall small details, her car swerving, the sound of tires screeching, the blinding lights of an oncoming vehicle, but the rest of the night was a blank. Her amnesia was unsettling, and it made Dr. Hartley wonder if there was something more at play. Sophie, feeling a growing sense of isolation, started to question everything. She couldn't understand why no one from her high-powered world had reached out to her. Her assistant? Her closest friends? They all knew where she was, didn't they? Despite her attempts to make calls from her hospital room, she got no response. It was almost as if she had been abandoned. One day, as Dr. Hartley entered her room to check on her, Sophie turned to him with a question that had been weighing on her mind. "Why hasn't anyone come to see me?" she asked softly, her voice tinged with frustration. Ethan hesitated, unsure how to answer. "I'm sure they're just busy," he said, though his words felt hollow even to him. He knew that Sophie was more than just a patient. She was a public figure, a woman whose every move was scrutinized. The fact that her family hadn't visited, that her business empire hadn't sent a single representative, was highly unusual. "No one has reached out?" Sophie pressed. Dr. Hartley shook his head. "Not yet, but I'm sure they'll be here soon." But even as he said the words, he didn't believe them. That night, after her shift, Ethan sat alone in his office, reviewing Sophie's medical records once again. His mind raced as he reviewed every detail of her case. The accident had been severe, but the injuries she had sustained didn't fully explain why she had been left in a coma for so long. He had seen similar cases before, but Sophie's condition seemed different. As he ran his hand through his hair, Ethan's thoughts turned back to the mysterious circumstances surrounding the accident. There had to be more to it than what they were being told. Sophie's injuries, while severe, were not life-threatening. So why had she been left alone for so long without any family support? The more he thought about it, the more he realized that something wasn't adding up. The next day, Dr. Hartley decided to dig deeper. He discreetly requested access to the police report regarding the accident. What he found only raised more questions. The report indicated that the crash had been caused by a mechanical failure in the car, something that, on the surface, seemed like a simple, tragic accident. But the more Ethan read, the more he suspected that there was foul play involved. The brakes had been tampered with, and there were signs that the car had been deliberately sabotaged. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. Sophie Langley had been the victim of an accident, but the truth was much darker than anyone had realized. The realization hit him hard. Someone had tried to kill Sophie. He needed to speak to her about it, but how could he do that without alarming her? Sophie was fragile, still recovering from her physical injuries, and the last thing he wanted was to cause her even more stress. He decided to wait, to be sure, but the truth weighed heavily on his mind. As he continued to care for Sophie, Ethan began to notice changes in her behavior. She was more alert now, more aware of her surroundings. She began to ask questions about her business, her empire, and her employees. Sophie was starting to remember more and more about her life before the accident, but the memories were coming back in fragments, like pieces of a broken mirror. Some were clear, while others were blurry and incomplete. One evening, as Ethan checked in on her, Sophie seemed particularly agitated. She was staring at the wall, her eyes wide with panic. "What's wrong?" Ethan asked, concerned. "I don't know," she said, her voice shaky. "I keep seeing flashes of something, but I can't make sense of it. It's like someone is watching me." Ethan frowned. This was the first time Sophie had mentioned feeling paranoid, and it worried him. He sat down beside her, trying to calm her. "You're safe here, Sophie. No one is going to hurt you." But Sophie wasn't convinced. "I don't think I'm safe anywhere," she whispered. As the days passed, Sophie's paranoia grew. She began to feel like someone was following her, watching her every move. She couldn't shake the feeling that the accident had been no accident at all, and Ethan began to believe her. Something was very wrong, and he was going to find out what it was. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. The days that followed Sophie Langley's awakening became a whirlwind of emotions and growing uncertainty. Dr. Ethan Hartley continued his role as her primary care physician, but as the days passed, both of them were becoming increasingly aware that the situation surrounding Sophie's accident was much more complex than either of them had initially thought. Sophie's paranoia was escalating, and it seemed like every moment spent in the sterile hospital room only deepened her sense of unease. Her questions about the crash, the lack of support from her family, and the sense of being watched began to plague her mind more than ever. Asterisk, asterisk. Ethan could see it in her eyes, the fear and confusion that had taken root. She was no longer just recovering from physical trauma. She was battling an invisible enemy, one that she couldn't yet name. Her thoughts were scattered, and her emotions fluctuated between anger, confusion, and terror. One afternoon, as Ethan entered her room to check on her, he found her sitting up in bed, her hands clenched tightly around the sheets. Her face was pale, and her breathing was shallow. "What's going on, Sophie?" Ethan asked gently, his voice filled with concern. Sophie's eyes darted around the room, as if searching for something, or someone, hiding in the shadows. "I keep hearing things," she whispered, her voice quivering. "It's like someone is in here with me. I feel their presence. It's like I'm not alone." Ethan's heart sank as he saw the raw fear in her eyes. He knew that Sophie wasn't imagining things, but he also knew that paranoia could distort reality. "Sophie, no one is here. You're safe," he reassured her, sitting down beside her. Sophie shook her head, her eyes wide with distress. "You don't understand. I don't think the crash was an accident. Someone did this to me. They're trying to keep me quiet." Ethan's mind raced. Was she simply experiencing the aftermath of the trauma, or was there something more to her story? The doubt that had been nagging at him since the beginning now seemed to grow even stronger. Sophie's sense of fear was real, and it was driving her to the brink of hysteria. Despite his medical training, Ethan didn't know how to calm her. She wasn't just physically injured, her mind had become a battlefield. Sophie began to isolate herself more. She refused to speak with anyone else, convinced that someone in the hospital staff was involved. Her paranoia seemed to cloud her judgment. She wouldn't even let Ethan leave the room without feeling like someone was watching her. Despite all the efforts to calm her, Sophie's mental health deteriorated. She became withdrawn, even more suspicious of the people around her. Dr. Hartley tried his best to comfort her, but the situation was becoming increasingly delicate. He knew that Sophie needed to face the truth about what had happened, but he didn't know how to help her put the pieces together. One evening, after a long day of trying to care for Sophie and the other patients, Ethan sat down at his desk. He was reviewing the police report on the crash once again, looking for any new clues, any small detail that might shed light on the situation. His fingers hovered over the keyboard as he considered the possibilities. What if Sophie's suspicions were right? What if her accident hadn't been an accident at all? He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something important he was missing. He had already checked the vehicle's mechanical reports and confirmed that the brakes had been tampered with. But who would want to harm Sophie Langley, and why? As Ethan scrolled through the police documents, one detail caught his eye. It was a list of witnesses to the accident, a few names he didn't recognize. He printed the report and made a note to contact them the next day. The pieces were starting to come together, but the picture was still incomplete. Sophie's suspicion that someone had orchestrated the crash was beginning to make more sense, but the question remained. Who could want to harm a successful businesswoman like her? The next morning, Ethan made his first call to one of the witnesses. The man, a truck driver who had been on the same road that night, recalled seeing Sophie's car swerve erratically before it veered off the road and crashed. He also mentioned something curious, a flash of light just before the crash. Ethan took notes as the man continued, trying to keep his emotions in check. Could someone have intentionally caused the crash, using some kind of distraction to lead Sophie off course? The possibility was chilling, but it was the only lead that seemed to make sense. After the call, Ethan sat quietly in his office, staring out the window. His thoughts were consumed with the mystery that was unfolding. He knew he couldn't keep this to himself. He had to share his findings with Sophie. As he entered her room that afternoon, Sophie was staring out the window, lost in thought. She didn't even notice him at first. "Sophie," Ethan said softly, trying to break her concentration. She turned to look at him, her face pale and tired. "I've been looking into the accident," Ethan began. Sophie's eyes immediately narrowed with suspicion. "And?" she asked, her voice sharp. "I found something," Ethan replied, sitting down beside her. "There were witnesses, and one of them mentioned seeing a flash of light right before the crash. It's possible that someone was trying to cause the accident on purpose." Sophie's eyes widened, a flicker of recognition passing through them. "I knew it," she whispered. "Someone wanted me dead." Asterisk, asterisk. Asterisk, asterisk. Sophie's face grew pale as she processed the revelation. The idea that someone had orchestrated her crash was no longer just a suspicion. It was becoming an undeniable truth. Ethan could see the shock and fear in her eyes, but beneath it, there was a flicker of something else: determination. Sophie was no longer the helpless woman who had awoken in a hospital bed. She was becoming the woman who wanted answers, who wanted to fight back. Asterisk, asterisk. Someone tried to kill me, she whispered, more to herself than to Ethan. Ethan sat down beside her, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He had never expected this when he first started taking care of her. What had seemed like a simple case had turned into something much more sinister. He knew he couldn't just sit back and let things unfold on their own. They needed to take action, but the question was, where to begin? The authorities had already concluded that it was an accident, but Ethan wasn't convinced. There were too many inconsistencies in the case, and Sophie's story was starting to make more sense. She had been targeted, and someone had gone to great lengths to make it look like an accident. Ethan's thoughts were interrupted when Sophie turned to him with a desperate look in her eyes. "What do we do now?" she asked. "We need to find out who did this to you," Ethan replied, his voice steady. "But we have to be careful. Whoever did this might be watching us, and we need to gather evidence before we make any moves." Sophie nodded, but the fear in her eyes was palpable. She had spent weeks in a coma, fighting for her life, only to wake up and realize that someone had wanted her dead. It was almost too much to comprehend. "Who would want to hurt me?" Sophie asked, her voice shaking. "I've worked my whole life to build something. I've helped so many people." Ethan sighed, unsure how to answer. He had his suspicions, but there was no concrete evidence to support them yet. "It's too soon to say," he replied, keeping his tone neutral. "But we'll find out, I promise." Over the next few days, Ethan and Sophie worked together, quietly investigating the circumstances surrounding the crash. Sophie's memory was still spotty, but she began to recall details that had slipped through the cracks. She remembered driving late at night, rushing to a meeting with an important client. She had been distracted, her mind racing with thoughts of the upcoming deal, but she had no recollection of what had happened just before the crash. One thing that stuck out to Sophie was the flash of light. She had seen it in her mind's eye the moment she tried to make sense of the crash. It had come out of nowhere, blinding her for a split second. That was when she had lost control of the car. The more she thought about it, the more she became convinced that the flash of light had been intentional. Someone had used it as a distraction. But who? And why? As they pieced together the timeline of the crash, Ethan began to uncover a series of unsettling connections. Sophie's business dealings had recently put her at odds with some powerful figures, rivals in the industry, who might stand to gain from her downfall. One name stood out among the rest: Nathan Bennett, a former business partner who had once worked closely with Sophie. Nathan had always been ambitious, and their falling out had been widely discussed in business circles. Ethan suspected that Nathan might be involved, but he couldn't jump to conclusions without solid proof. Sophie, on the other hand, wasn't as reserved. She was adamant that Nathan had something to do with the crash. "He was always jealous of my success," she said bitterly. "He tried to sabotage my company once before, and I wouldn't put it past him to do something like this." Ethan didn't dismiss her feelings, but he knew they needed more than just her suspicions to move forward. "Let's dig deeper," he suggested. "We need to find out where Nathan was the night of the accident." Sophie agreed, but she also knew that the closer they got to the truth, the more dangerous things could become. She wasn't just fighting to clear her name anymore, she was fighting for her life. As they continued their investigation, Sophie began to notice small things that made her feel even more paranoid. The hospital staff seemed to act strangely around her, almost like they were avoiding her. She also received a cryptic message one night. A note slipped under her door that simply read, "Stay quiet if you know what's good for you." The message sent chills down her spine, but it also confirmed her worst fears: someone was watching her. Someone was trying to silence her. Sophie showed the note to Ethan, and he immediately went on high alert. They were being targeted, and whoever was behind this would stop at nothing to keep them from uncovering the truth. "We need to be careful," Ethan said, his voice low. "This is bigger than we thought. Whoever is behind this isn't just trying to hurt you, they're trying to destroy everything you've worked for." Sophie's eyes darkened with resolve. "I won't let them," she said firmly. "I will not let them get away with this." As the days passed, the tension in the hospital grew. Sophie's recovery was no longer just about healing from the physical injuries of the crash. She was fighting a much bigger battle, one that could cost her everything. Ethan knew that they were getting closer to the truth, but with every step they took, the danger grew more real. Whoever was behind the sabotage was getting desperate, and Sophie was becoming more of a target than ever. The next move would be critical if they were going to uncover the truth. They had to be careful, and they had to act fast. Sophie wasn't going to back down, and neither was Ethan. The battle for her life, and for the truth, was only just beginning. Asterisk, asterisk. Asterisk, asterisk. Sophie's recovery had taken on a new intensity. The physical wounds she had sustained from the crash were healing, but the emotional toll was mounting. Every day, she found herself staring at the walls of her hospital room, feeling the weight of the danger that seemed to lurk just beyond her reach. Dr. Ethan Hartley remained by her side, helping her regain her strength, but also becoming increasingly concerned about her mental state. Sophie's paranoia had deepened, and with every passing hour, the pressure of the situation seemed to bear down on her more heavily. The cryptic note she had received a few nights earlier had made it clear. Someone was watching her. Someone didn't want the truth to come out. Ethan knew they were running out of time. They couldn't wait much longer to confront the person behind the sabotage, or whatever sinister force was pulling the strings. Sophie's life was at risk, and so was the truth. But as much as they had uncovered, there was still a significant piece of the puzzle missing. Sophie's suspicions about Nathan Bennett, her former business partner, had only grown stronger. Ethan couldn't ignore her gut feeling, but the evidence they had gathered so far was circumstantial at best. The flash of light before the crash, the sabotaged brakes, Nathan's history with Sophie, it was all pointing in one direction, but they needed proof. The question that haunted Ethan was, how far was Nathan willing to go to stop them? It wasn't just about business rivalry anymore. There was something much darker at play. Sophie, determined to uncover the truth, began to dig into Nathan's past. She combed through old business records, trying to find any clue that would connect him to the sabotage. As she sat in her hospital room, surrounded by piles of documents, she came across something that made her blood run cold. There, buried deep in the financial records, was a set of transactions that didn't add up. Payments made to a company linked to a known group of criminal contacts, individuals who had been involved in everything from blackmail to illegal operations. Sophie stared at the papers, her heart pounding in her chest. It was becoming clear. Nathan had connections, dangerous ones. Ethan had noticed the change in Sophie over the past few days. She had become more focused, more resolute. It was as though something inside her had clicked. She was no longer just a woman trying to recover from a near-fatal accident. She was a woman on a mission. "Ethan, I found something," Sophie said one morning, her voice steady but intense. "I think Nathan isn't just after my company. He's involved in something much bigger. I have proof." Ethan's eyes widened as she handed him the documents. He scanned the papers quickly, his mind racing. This doesn't just implicate Nathan. It connects him to a whole network. Whoever is behind this wasn't acting alone. Sophie's voice trembled slightly, but her resolve remained firm. "This isn't just business anymore, Ethan. This is personal. They wanted me out of the way." The weight of her words sank in as Ethan sat back in his chair, processing what Sophie had just revealed. If they were right, they were not only up against a business rival, but a criminal syndicate that had no qualms about using violence to get what they wanted. The situation was far more dangerous than either of them had anticipated, but they couldn't stop now. Sophie had come too far. They had uncovered a trail, and they were going to follow it no matter where it led. Later that day, as Sophie and Ethan discussed their next steps, there was a knock at the door. It was one of the hospital staff, a nurse named Helen who had been working with Sophie since her arrival. She seemed nervous as she entered, her eyes darting around the room. "Dr. Hartley, Miss Langley, I think you need to hear this," she said, her voice low. Sophie's stomach churned. "What is it, Helen?" she asked, her heart skipping a beat. Helen looked over her shoulder before speaking again. "I overheard something. The person who left that note for you, Sophie, They're one of us. Someone in the hospital is working with Nathan. They've been watching you the whole time." Sophie froze, her hand trembling as she gripped the edge of her bed. Ethan's jaw tightened as he processed what Helen had just revealed. "How do you know this?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Helen swallowed hard, looking down. "I heard them talking in the break room. They were discussing the crash. They mentioned something about making sure you don't remember the details, about keeping you quiet. I'm sorry. I didn't know who to trust. But now—" Helen was cut off as the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. She glanced nervously toward the door. "I think someone's coming. I have to go." She turned quickly and left, leaving Sophie and Ethan stunned. Sophie sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the revelation sinking in. "I can't believe this," she whispered. "Someone in the hospital is involved in all of this." Ethan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, his mind already running through their next moves. "We need to find out who it is before it's too late. And we need to be careful. Whoever is behind this has resources, and they won't hesitate to use them against us." Sophie nodded, her fear giving way to anger. "I'm not going to let them get away with this. I've fought too hard to let them win." She stood up, determination in her eyes. Ethan was by her side in an instant. "We'll figure this out together," he said, his voice firm. "We won't stop until we get to the truth." The stakes had just been raised. With the walls closing in and enemies lurking in the shadows, Sophie and Ethan knew they were in a race against time. They had no choice but to confront the threat head-on and take the fight to those who wanted to destroy her. This was no longer just about survival, it was about justice, and Sophie wasn't going to back down. Asterisk. Sophie and Ethan knew they were facing a race against time. The truth about her accident and the people behind it was becoming clearer, but the danger surrounding them was only escalating. The revelation that someone inside the hospital was working with Nathan Bennett, someone who had been watching Sophie all along, had shifted the stakes dramatically. They could no longer trust anyone. Sophie's sense of safety had crumbled, and she was now more determined than ever to expose the truth. With every passing moment, she felt like the walls were closing in on her. She had spent days trapped in a hospital room, recovering from injuries, trying to piece together fragments of her life, but now she had to confront the very people who had been trying to silence her. Asterisk. "We need to move fast," Ethan said, pacing around the room, his mind working through their options. "We can't let them get any closer. We need to find out who inside the hospital is working with Nathan. But we also need to be careful whoever it is has access to everything, including you." Sophie nodded, her resolve hardening. "I'm not going to sit here and wait for them to make their next move. I won't let them control my life anymore." She stood up slowly, her body still recovering from the crash, but her spirit burning with an intensity she hadn't felt before. She was ready for action, ready to confront the shadows that had been following her. Ethan knew Sophie wasn't going to back down. She had become stronger than he had ever imagined. But they needed a plan, something concrete to move forward with. The two of them sat down, mapping out their next steps. They needed to find the person in the hospital who had been leaking information, someone who had been feeding Nathan details about Sophie's condition and whereabouts. "I'll keep my eyes on the staff," Ethan said, "but I can't do it alone. We need to find out who's been acting suspiciously. We have to figure out who's working with Nathan and how deep it goes." Sophie was quiet for a moment, her gaze focused as she thought. Then it hit her. "Helen," she said suddenly, looking up at Ethan. "Helen was the one who warned us. She's the one who gave us the first real clue. What if she knows more than she's letting on?" Ethan paused, considering her words. "It's a possibility. She's been acting nervous lately, and the way she slipped that note under your door, she might be the key to this. But we have to be careful. If she's involved, we can't just approach her blindly. She might be trying to help us, but she could also be trying to lead us into a trap." Sophie's heart raced as she thought about Helen. Could the nurse who had been so kind to her really be part of the conspiracy? Or had she been trying to help? She didn't know, but one thing was certain. Helen was the only person who had given them information they could trust. Sophie and Ethan decided to approach the situation cautiously. They couldn't afford to make any mistakes. They needed to find Helen and have a discreet conversation with her. But they also had to make sure that whoever was behind this wasn't watching their every move. That afternoon, Ethan called Helen into Sophie's room. The nurse arrived, looking as tense as ever. She glanced at both of them nervously before speaking. "You wanted to see me?" she asked, her voice low. "Yes, Helen," Ethan said, keeping his voice calm and reassuring. "We need to talk. Sophie and I have been looking into the accident, and we think there's something more going on. We need your help." Helen's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't say anything. Sophie sat up straighter in bed, watching the nurse carefully. "Helen," Sophie said, her voice steady but filled with a quiet intensity. "You've been helping us more than you realize. The note you gave me, it confirmed everything we've been suspecting. Someone inside the hospital is working with Nathan Bennett, and we need to know who." Helen's face went pale, and for a moment, it seemed as though she might break down. She started, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean for you to get involved. I thought you were in danger, and I didn't know who to trust. But I didn't think this would go this far." Sophie and Ethan exchanged a glance, and Sophie's heart skipped a beat. "Helen, you're in danger too," Sophie said softly. "If they find out you've helped us, they'll do anything to stop you. You need to tell us everything you know." Helen hesitated, her eyes darting around the room as if she were weighing her options. Finally, she sat down at the edge of Sophie's bed and spoke in a hushed tone. "I didn't mean to get involved with Nathan," she confessed. "But he's been sending people to check on you, people who aren't from the hospital. He offered me money, said he could help me out of a bad situation, if I did what he asked." Sophie's stomach churned at the thought. "What did he want?" she asked. Helen took a deep breath, her voice shaking. "He wanted me to keep tabs on you, Sophie. He wanted me to make sure you didn't remember anything important about the crash. He said you were getting too close to the truth, and he couldn't let that happen." Ethan clenched his fists at his sides. "And you did this for him?" Helen looked down, tears welling in her eyes. "I didn't have a choice. I was desperate. But when I saw how scared you were, I knew I had to do something. I've been trying to help you, but I'm afraid. I didn't know who to trust. But now, I see you're really fighting. I don't want to be part of this anymore." Sophie could feel the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about all of them, about the people who had been caught in the crossfire of Nathan Bennett's ambitions. "Helen, we need to stop him. We need to make sure he doesn't get away with this." Helen nodded, her face pale but determined. "I'll help you," she said, her voice firm. "I'll do whatever it takes." With their new ally in tow, Sophie and Ethan knew they had a chance to finally take down Nathan Bennett and uncover the truth about the accident. But the stakes were higher than ever. The fight for Sophie's life and for the truth was far from over. They were just getting started. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. Sophie, Ethan, and Helen stood together in the quiet hospital room, their minds working overtime as they prepared for what was next. The truth about the accident, about Nathan Bennett's involvement, and about the conspiracy that had nearly cost Sophie her life, was now clearer than ever. They couldn't waste any more time. Sophie knew that she needed to regain control of her life, and it wasn't going to happen by sitting back. Ethan, always steady, had been her rock throughout this whole ordeal. But now, it was time for action. Helen, once a seemingly innocent nurse, had proven herself as a valuable ally. The pieces of the puzzle were finally beginning to fit, but the threat they were facing had only become more dangerous. Nathan's reach was far, and now that he knew they were closing in on him, there was no telling what lengths he would go to stop them. Asterisk, asterisk. The three of them gathered in a private corner of the hospital, speaking in hushed voices as they outlined their next move. They knew that Nathan Bennett had powerful connections, but what they hadn't expected was how far his influence stretched. Sophie had built a successful empire, but Nathan had always been in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. And now, that moment had arrived. They needed to gather enough evidence to expose Nathan for what he was. Sophie had already uncovered the financial transactions that linked Nathan to a criminal network. But it wasn't enough. They needed something more concrete, something that would force the authorities to take action. "We can't just rely on the police reports anymore," Ethan said, his voice low but determined. "We need to get to Nathan directly. He won't stop until he's sure we're out of the picture." Sophie nodded, her mind racing. "We need to find out what he's planning next. He's been too quiet lately, and I don't think that's a good thing. Helen, who had been sitting silently, suddenly spoke up. I overheard something the other night. It wasn't much, but it's a start. Nathan's been making phone calls, and I think he's preparing for something big. I heard him mention a final move. Sophie's eyes narrowed. A final move? What does that mean? I don't know, Helen replied, her voice tinged with fear. But I think he's planning to finish what he started. He's not going to stop until he's sure you're out of the way. Ethan stood up, his fists clenched at his sides. Then we need to act quickly. We can't let him get the upper hand. They all agreed that the only way forward was to confront Nathan head-on, but it wasn't going to be easy. They had to be strategic, gathering more information about Nathan's plans without tipping their hand. The next few days were a blur of careful planning and quiet surveillance. Ethan and Sophie stayed close, while Helen kept her ears open, monitoring the hospital staff and listening for any hints of Nathan's movements. It wasn't long before they discovered that Nathan had been in contact with several shady individuals, people who had been known to deal in underground operations. It was clear that Nathan wasn't just a businessman anymore. He was fully involved in a dangerous world, and Sophie had unknowingly become a target because of it. As the tension continued to mount, Sophie began to feel the weight of her choices. Every decision she made, every move she took, felt like it was pushing her further into danger. But there was no turning back. She had already made the choice to fight back, and now she had to see it through. The phone call that came one afternoon changed everything. It was a blocked number, and Sophie didn't recognize the voice on the other end. "This is your last warning," the voice said coldly. "Stay out of this, or you'll regret it." Sophie's blood ran cold as she listened to the threatening words. Nathan was trying to intimidate her, to force her into submission, but Sophie wasn't about to back down. "I'm not afraid of you," Sophie replied, her voice steady. "I'm not going anywhere." The line went dead, and Sophie's hand trembled as she hung up the phone. Ethan, who had been standing nearby, rushed over to her. "What happened?" he asked, concern in his voice. Sophie looked at him, her eyes burning with determination. "That was Nathan. He's trying to intimidate me, but it won't work." Ethan took a deep breath. "This is getting more dangerous. We have to move fast. If Nathan's making threats like this, it means he's getting desperate." Sophie nodded, her mind made up. "We can't let him win. We're too close now." As the days passed, their investigation deepened. They discovered that Nathan had planned a meeting with a group of investors in a remote location, a place far from the city. It was clear that he was preparing for something big, something that would solidify his power and eliminate any threats to his control. Sophie and Ethan knew they had to get there first, to intercept Nathan before he could carry out whatever plan he had. With Helen's help, they made their way to the location, a secluded estate on the outskirts of town. The tension was thick in the air as they arrived, the sound of their car tires crunching on the gravel driveway echoing in the stillness of the night. They had no idea what they would find, but they knew it was their only chance to stop Nathan before it was too late. As they approached the estate, Sophie's heart pounded in her chest. This was the moment of truth. They were walking into the lion's den, but they couldn't turn back now. They were ready to face Nathan Bennett and put an end to the threat that had haunted Sophie's life for far too long. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. As Sophie, Ethan, and Helen approached the secluded estate, the air grew colder, and the sense of danger that had been looming over them for weeks became palpable. This was it, the place where it would all come to a head. Sophie's heart was pounding in her chest as they parked the car on the gravel driveway, the sound of the tires crunching underfoot the only thing breaking the eerie silence of the night. It was a large, imposing mansion, surrounded by thick woods that blocked out the moonlight, making the place feel isolated and impenetrable. This was where Nathan Bennett had chosen to meet with his investors, and where Sophie knew she would finally confront him. But as they stood outside the vehicle, preparing to step into the unknown, the weight of the situation hit them all. Sophie wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting to expose Nathan for the dangerous, manipulative man he was, and to stop him from hurting anyone else. Ethan looked at Sophie, his expression serious. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice low. "Once we go in, there's no turning back." Sophie took a deep breath, her gaze fixed on the mansion ahead. I'm sure. We have to stop him, Ethan. He won't stop until he gets what he wants, and I won't let him destroy everything I've worked for. Helen, standing beside them, nodded in agreement. We're with you, Sophie. We won't let him get away with it. With that, they moved toward the mansion, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of fallen leaves and dirt beneath them. The closer they got, the more tense the air became. Sophie could feel the weight of the night pressing in on her, but there was no turning back now. They had to see this through. As they reached the entrance, they were met by two security guards who immediately recognized them. Sophie's heart skipped a beat. Nathan had expected them, but they couldn't back down now. We're here to speak with Nathan, Sophie said, her voice steady despite the fear she felt rising within her. One of the guards eyed them suspiciously, but before he could respond, Ethan spoke. We're here on business, and Nathan's expecting us. The guard hesitated, glancing at the other before stepping aside. Go in, but don't make a scene. With a curt nod, Sophie, Ethan, and Helen stepped past the guards and entered the mansion. The interior was everything Sophie had expected, opulent, cold, and foreboding. The grand chandelier above them glimmered faintly in the dim light, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors. It felt like they had stepped into another world, one where everything was controlled, calculated, and hiding secrets. They were led down a long hallway, and as they approached a large double door, Sophie's nerves surged. This was it. Nathan was just behind those doors, and everything she had been through, every painful moment, every step she had taken to uncover the truth, had led to this confrontation. The door swung open, and there, sitting at a long table with several well-dressed individuals, was Nathan Bennett. His cold eyes met Sophie's, and a slow, malicious smile spread across his face. Well, well, he said, his voice smooth and confident. I was wondering when you'd show up. Sophie stood tall, refusing to let him see her fear. It's over, Nathan. I know everything. Nathan raised an eyebrow, leaning back in his chair as if he were amused. You think you know everything, but you don't know anything. You have no idea what you're up against. Sophie's eyes narrowed, her voice hard. I know you tampered with my car's brakes. I know you've been working with criminals. And I know you've been trying to erase me from the picture because you couldn't stand the fact that I was better than you. Nathan chuckled, shaking his head. You still don't get it, do you? It was never about you being better than me. It was about control. It was about power. I built an empire, Sophie, and you were in the way. Ethan stepped forward, his presence a silent but strong support for Sophie. You're not going to get away with this, Nathan. You've crossed a line, and it's over now. Nathan's smile faded slightly, but he quickly masked it with a cold expression. You think you've won? You're in my world now. You're in my house, and you've already lost. Sophie's heart raced, but she refused to let him see any signs of doubt. She had come too far to back down now. We have everything we need to expose you, she said, and it's just a matter of time before everyone finds out who you really are. Nathan's eyes flickered with something dark, and for a moment the arrogance he had worn so confidently cracked. You don't understand what you're dealing with. I don't lose, and neither do my associates. Sophie could feel the weight of his words, but she wasn't afraid anymore. She had survived too much to let him intimidate her. You're wrong, she said, her voice steady. You've already lost. The truth is coming, and nothing you do can stop it. Nathan stood up, his demeanor shifting from casual confidence to cold, calculating rage. You think you can take me down? You have no idea what's at stake here. You're just a pawn in a much bigger game. Sophie didn't flinch. Maybe. But even pawns can checkmate kings. As Sophie spoke, she could feel the tension in the room thickening. She knew the fight wasn't over, not yet. But she also knew that she was no longer fighting alone. Ethan and Helen stood by her, ready to face whatever came next. Nathan's empire was crumbling, and Sophie was prepared to bring it down, no matter what it took. The confrontation had only just begun, but Sophie's resolve was stronger than ever. She wasn't going to stop until Nathan Bennett was exposed for the monster he truly was. The truth was in her hands, and she was ready to take back control of her life. Asterisk, asterisk. The confrontation in the grand hall of Nathan Bennett's mansion reached a boiling point. Sophie stood tall, her gaze unwavering, as Nathan's confident smile began to falter. His expression shifted from one of arrogance to something darker, more dangerous. Ethan and Helen flanked her, their silent support lending her the strength to face the man who had orchestrated so much pain and fear in her life. Sophie could feel the tension in the room thickening, but she refused to back down. She had come too far to turn back now. "You've already lost, Nathan," Sophie said, her voice firm, echoing the conviction she had carried with her all this time. "It's only a matter of time before your empire crumbles." Nathan's eyes flickered, the faintest trace of doubt crossing his face, but it was quickly replaced by cold fury. He took a step forward, his posture threatening. "You think you can bring me down? You don't even know the extent of what you're dealing with," he snarled, his voice low and dangerous. "You've already overstepped. If you think you're going to walk out of here with the truth, you're sorely mistaken." Sophie didn't flinch. "I know everything I need to know. You thought you could bury the truth, but it's already out in the open. You're done." Nathan's gaze darkened, and for a brief moment, Sophie saw the ruthless, calculating man he truly was. He wasn't used to being challenged, and he wasn't going to let someone like Sophie Langley stand in his way. "You think I'll just let you walk away?" Nathan sneered, taking another menacing step toward Sophie. "You're not in control here, Sophie. I am, and the longer you keep pushing, the more painful it will be for you." Sophie stood her ground, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "You've already tried to kill me once. You think I'm scared of you?" Ethan stepped forward, his presence calm but resolute. "Nathan, enough. This has gone on long enough. We have everything we need to expose you. It's over." Nathan froze, his eyes narrowing as he studied Ethan. He had underestimated Ethan's determination, and now the doctor wasn't backing down. For a moment, the room fell into an eerie silence. The atmosphere was thick with the weight of the words exchanged. Sophie could feel her pulse racing, the air feeling heavier with every breath. Nathan was no longer just a businessman. He was a man desperate to hold on to the power he had built, a power that had corrupted him and led to the destruction of so many lives. But Sophie wasn't afraid anymore. She wasn't the same vulnerable woman who had woken up in a hospital bed all those weeks ago. She had fought, she had survived, and now she was ready to take back control of her life. "You're done, Nathan," Sophie repeated, her voice unwavering. "You can't intimidate me anymore. You're not the one in control. I am." Nathan's face twisted in anger, but Sophie could see the hesitation in his eyes. He was losing his grip. Ethan moved to Sophie's side, his support a quiet but strong presence. "This is your last chance, Nathan," Ethan said, his voice sharp. "Turn yourself in, and maybe there's a way out for you. But if you keep fighting, if you keep trying to manipulate and destroy people, there will be no escape." Nathan's lips curled into a smirk, but there was a tremor of fear behind his eyes. "You really think you can beat me?" he hissed. "I have more power than you can even comprehend. You're just playing a game you don't understand." Sophie wasn't backing down. "I understand enough to know that your time is up. You've tried to destroy everything I've worked for, but you've underestimated me. You've underestimated how far I'll go to protect what's mine." Nathan's composure started to crack, his gaze flickering as he realized Sophie's resolve. "You're wrong. You have no idea who you're dealing with," he said, his voice rising in anger. Sophie didn't let him get the upper hand. "The only thing I know is that you're a coward who's afraid of the truth. You can't hide behind your money and your connections anymore." The tension in the room was unbearable. Sophie could feel her heart racing as she prepared for the next move, but Nathan's expression suddenly shifted. The anger in his eyes was replaced by something else, a cold calculation. He glanced toward the door, his hand twitching slightly as if signaling someone. Sophie's breath caught in her throat. She realized too late that Nathan wasn't going to surrender quietly. He had one last card to play. "You think you've won?" Nathan sneered, and before Sophie could react, he shouted, "Get them!" Suddenly, the door burst open, and several large men rushed into the room, their movements quick and aggressive. Sophie's mind raced, but before she could think, Ethan stepped forward, placing himself between Sophie and the approaching figures. "Get behind me," he said firmly. Helen, who had been standing off to the side, immediately moved to Sophie's side, ready to help in any way she could, but the odds were against them. Sophie knew they had to act fast, or this confrontation could turn deadly. The men moved toward them, blocking the exits, their eyes locked on Sophie and Ethan. The room was now filled with a palpable sense of danger. Sophie's pulse was pounding, but she wasn't going to let fear take control. This wasn't just about her survival anymore, it was about taking down Nathan Bennett for good. She wasn't going to be intimidated. "You want to play this game, Nathan?" Sophie called out, her voice steady despite the tension. "Then let's finish it, once and for all." The fight was far from over, but Sophie was ready. She had come too far, and she wasn't going to stop now. With Ethan and Helen by her side, she was ready to face whatever came next and finally take control of her life and her future. Nathan Bennett was about to learn that the truth couldn't be silenced, and neither could Sophie Langley. Asterisk, asterisk. The confrontation in Nathan Bennett's mansion had reached a breaking point. Sophie, Ethan, and Helen stood in the center of the room, surrounded by Nathan's men, their eyes filled with cold malice. The threat of violence loomed heavy in the air, but Sophie wasn't afraid. She had come this far, and there was no turning back now. The truth was within her grasp, and she was determined to take Nathan down, no matter the cost. Nathan, standing behind his desk, seemed more like a predator than a businessman. His calm demeanor had all but disappeared, replaced by the desperation of someone who knew he was losing control. "You think you've won?" Nathan spat, his voice venomous. "You're just a pawn in a game you don't even understand." Sophie didn't flinch. "I'm not a pawn anymore, Nathan," she said, her voice unwavering. "I'm taking back control, and you're going to pay for what you've done." Nathan's men moved closer, but Ethan stepped forward, positioning himself between Sophie and the advancing figures. "Stay behind me," he whispered urgently to Sophie. Sophie's heart raced, but she trusted Ethan. He had been there for her every step of the way, and now, as they faced this final showdown, she knew they had to stand together. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the room as Nathan's men closed in, but Sophie's mind was laser-focused on the goal. This was the moment she had been preparing for. "You won't get away with this," Ethan said firmly, his voice carrying a quiet strength. Nathan sneered, taking a step toward them. "I've already won. There's nothing you can do to stop me now." Sophie's breath caught in her throat. Nathan was trying to intimidate them, but she wasn't backing down. "You're wrong," Sophie said, her voice cutting through the tension. "The truth is coming, and nothing you do can change that." As Sophie spoke, she realized that she wasn't just standing up for herself anymore. She was standing up for everyone he had ever hurt. She was fighting for the future she had almost lost. Suddenly, one of Nathan's men lunged forward, but before he could reach Sophie, Ethan reacted with lightning speed. He sidestepped, expertly blocking the attacker's path and knocking him off balance. The other men hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to respond. Nathan's expression hardened. "You're going to regret this," he growled, motioning for his men to advance. But just as the situation seemed to escalate, there was a sudden sound from the doorway. A loud crash. The men froze, and for a brief moment, chaos erupted in the room as everyone turned toward the source of the noise. To Sophie's surprise, the figure who stepped through the door was none other than Officer Harris, the detective who had been investigating the accident from the beginning. With him were several uniformed police officers. "Hold it right there," Officer Harris commanded, his voice sharp and authoritative. Nathan's face turned ashen, and the men who had been advancing on Sophie froze. "What is this?" Nathan demanded, his voice now tinged with panic. Officer Harris didn't flinch. "You're under arrest for multiple counts of conspiracy, attempted murder, and a long list of other crimes, Nathan. Your game is over." Sophie's heart raced, but this time, it wasn't from fear, it was from relief. The cavalry had arrived. Nathan, who had once seemed invincible, now appeared cornered. The smugness that had defined him in the past was gone, replaced by the stark realization that he had nowhere left to run. "You think you can stop me?" Nathan spat, his voice dripping with venom. "You don't know who I am." Officer Harris stepped forward, his expression unwavering. "I know exactly who you are, Nathan, and it's over." Nathan's men exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what to do. They were clearly outmatched, and with the police now in control, they had no choice but to stand down. Sophie felt a weight lifting off her shoulders as she watched the officers move in to arrest Nathan and his associates. It was finally over. The man who had tried to destroy her life was now at the mercy of the law. But as the officers handcuffed Nathan and led him out of the room, Sophie couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. There was relief, yes, but also a deep sadness. Nathan had been a man who had once been her business partner, someone she had trusted. It was hard to reconcile the man she had once known with the one standing before her now cold, calculating, and willing to do anything to stay in control. But Sophie knew that this was the only way. Nathan had crossed a line, and now it was time for him to face the consequences. As the last of Nathan's men were escorted out, Officer Harris turned to Sophie, his expression softer. "We have everything we need, Miss Langley. You don't have to worry about him anymore." Sophie nodded, her eyes focused on the door through which Nathan had just been taken. It was over. She had won. But the journey wasn't over for her yet. She had to rebuild. There would be fallout, both personal and professional. The scars of what had happened would remain, but Sophie knew that she had emerged from this battle stronger than ever. She turned to Ethan and Helen, her heart full of gratitude. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I couldn't have done this without you." Ethan gave her a small smile. "We're in this together." Helen nodded in agreement, her eyes filled with support. "You're stronger than you think, Sophie, and you've got people who will always have your back." Sophie felt a warmth spread through her, knowing that she wasn't alone anymore. She had found her strength. She had faced the darkness and come out the other side. And as the sun began to rise outside, casting a warm glow over the mansion, Sophie Langley knew that her journey was far from over. But for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to face whatever came next. The truth had come to light, and Sophie was finally free. Asterisk. Sophie stood at the window of her office, watching the early morning sunlight spill across the city skyline. It had been a few weeks since Nathan Bennett was arrested, and while the immediate danger had passed, Sophie was still processing everything that had happened. The road to recovery had been long, and it wasn't just about healing physically. She had spent so much of her time fighting for her life and exposing the truth that she hadn't taken a moment to breathe, to think about what this all meant for her future. The weight of her actions, the decisions she had made, had come with consequences, but they had also brought her peace. She had taken back control of her life. The months leading up to Nathan's arrest had been filled with tension, fear, and uncertainty. But now, as she gazed out over the city she had built, Sophie felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The future, for the first time in a long time, was hers to shape. Ethan entered the room quietly, his presence calming as always. Sophie turned to face him, and a smile tugged at her lips. "You're up early," Ethan said softly, his voice carrying a hint of concern. "Couldn't sleep," Sophie admitted, her gaze still on the city. "I guess there's a lot on my mind." Ethan nodded and approached her, standing by the window. "You've been through a lot. It's normal to feel that way." Sophie glanced at him, her expression shifting. "It's not just about the fight, Ethan. It's about everything that's come after. I can't stop thinking about how much I've changed through all of this." Ethan placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You're stronger than you know." Sophie looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "I never would have made it through this without you. You've been my anchor through all of it." Ethan smiled softly, his eyes warm. "And I'll always be here for you. Whatever comes next, you won't have to face it alone." Sophie took a deep breath, her gaze returning to the city below. "I don't know what's next, Ethan, but I know I'm ready to face it. I've fought so hard to get here, to take back what's mine. But now, I'm not just fighting to survive anymore. I'm fighting to rebuild, to make something better out of everything I've lost." Ethan squeezed her shoulder, his voice steady. "And you will. You've already started rebuilding. You've already taken the hardest step. You've taken control." Sophie smiled at him, feeling a sense of calm she hadn't expected. The weight of the past wasn't gone, but it was no longer holding her hostage. She was free. "I'm not done yet," she said, her voice firm with determination. "But I'll do it on my own terms." In the weeks that followed, Sophie made the decision to take full control of her company again. She had been pushed to the brink, but now, with Nathan out of the picture, it was time to rebuild what had been lost. She spent countless hours strategizing, meeting with her employees, and reconnecting with her team. The trust she had once had in people had been shattered, but she knew that if she wanted to move forward, she had to rebuild that trust both in herself and in others. Ethan remained by her side, offering support and guidance as she navigated the challenges ahead. Their bond, forged in the heat of adversity, only grew stronger. As Sophie worked to regain her footing, she realized that the most important thing she had learned throughout this journey wasn't about business, it was about resilience. It was about the ability to stand up again after being knocked down, to rise from the ashes stronger and more determined than ever. And Sophie knew that, no matter what happened next, she had the strength to face it. One afternoon, as Sophie sat at her desk, reviewing the final details of her next big project, she received an unexpected visitor. It was Helen, the nurse who had helped her when everything seemed lost. She had been the one to alert them to Nathan's betrayal, the one who had risked everything to help Sophie expose the truth. Helen had become more than just an ally, she had become a friend. Sophie looked up as Helen entered, her face lighting up with a warm smile. "How's everything going?" Helen asked, her voice gentle. "Better," Sophie replied, pushing her papers aside. "Much better. I'm still rebuilding, but I can finally breathe again." Helen took a seat across from Sophie, her expression thoughtful. "I'm glad to hear that. I know you've been through a lot, but you're stronger than anyone I know." Sophie smiled at the compliment, but a thought lingered in her mind. "I couldn't have done it without you, Helen. You were there when I needed someone the most." Helen's eyes softened. "We all have our role to play in this world, Sophie, and I'm just glad I could be there for you. You're going to do amazing things moving forward. I know it." Sophie nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I've realized something through all of this," she said quietly. "It's not just about what I've lost, it's about what I've gained. The people I've met along the way, the lessons I've learned. Those are the things that matter." As Sophie continued to rebuild, she kept her focus on the future. There would be challenges ahead, there always were. But Sophie knew now that she was no longer the same person who had walked into that hospital room months ago. She was someone who had fought for her life and won. And that victory wasn't just about bringing Nathan Bennett to justice. It was about reclaiming herself, about standing strong in the face of adversity, and about proving that no matter how hard life gets, the will to survive and rebuild is stronger than anything. As the days turned into weeks, Sophie's company began to flourish once again. The scars of the past remained, but they no longer defined her. She was no longer fighting to survive. She was fighting to thrive. And this time, she was doing it on her own terms. Asterisk. Months had passed since Nathan Bennett's arrest, and life was beginning to return to some semblance of normalcy for Sophie Langley. The company she had fought so hard to rebuild was thriving once again. And though the scars of the past would never truly fade, she was learning how to live with them. She spent her days meeting with business partners, refining strategies, and ensuring her company remained strong. But in the quiet moments, Sophie couldn't help but reflect on how much she had changed. She had faced unimaginable odds, and now she was stronger, more resilient than she had ever been before. The fight had been long and grueling, but Sophie had come out on top. And yet, despite the external success, Sophie still found herself longing for something more, something that would finally bring her peace. She had regained control of her life. But what about the emotional and psychological toll? She had been so focused on surviving, on defeating Nathan, and rebuilding her empire, that she hadn't given herself the time to truly heal. One evening, as she sat in her office, staring at the city below, Ethan walked in, as calm and composed as always. He had been her steadfast companion throughout the darkest moments of her journey. But now, he stood there, watching her, sensing the shift in her energy. "Something on your mind?" he asked gently, his voice as soothing as it had always been. Sophie looked up at him, her gaze softening. "I've been thinking a lot about the future," she said, her voice distant. "About everything that's happened, and how much I've changed. I'm not the same person I was before all of this. But sometimes, it feels like the weight of everything is still there." Ethan nodded, taking a seat across from her. "You've been through so much, Sophie. It's only natural to feel that way. But you don't have to carry that burden alone anymore. You've got people who care about you." Sophie smiled faintly, but there was still a trace of uncertainty in her eyes. "I've spent so much time focusing on surviving, on fighting back. I forgot what it means to just live." Ethan leaned forward, his eyes filled with understanding. "You've done the hardest part, Sophie. You fought for your life, for your company, and you won. But now, it's time to live, to find peace in what you've accomplished, and to enjoy the freedom you've earned." Sophie took a deep breath, letting the weight of his words sink in. She had been so consumed by the need to reclaim her life that she hadn't allowed herself the chance to savor it. She had been afraid to let her guard down, afraid that the moment she did, it would all come crashing down again. But Ethan was right. She had earned this, and she deserved to take the time to enjoy the fruits of her labor. Over the next few weeks, Sophie made a conscious effort to slow down. She started spending more time outside of work, reconnecting with old friends, and even taking some time for herself. She rediscovered her love for painting, a passion she had long since abandoned, and spent quiet afternoons in her studio, allowing herself to create without pressure or expectation. The healing process wasn't instantaneous, but slowly, Sophie began to feel a sense of peace that she had never known before. As her heart lightened, she started to allow herself to think about the future in a different way. She had spent so much time focusing on the past, on what had been taken from her, but now she was ready to look ahead. One afternoon, as she sat with Ethan in the park, the warmth of the sun on her face and the gentle breeze in the air, she realized just how far she had come. "I never thought I would get here," Sophie said quietly, her voice filled with awe. "There were so many times I thought I wouldn't make it. But now, I feel like I'm finally living." Ethan smiled, his expression tender. "You're living, Sophie. You've done the impossible. You've reclaimed your life, your company, and your peace. You've fought harder than most people ever will, and now you get to enjoy the rewards." Sophie's heart swelled with gratitude. She had come so far, and while the scars of the past would always remain, they no longer defined her. She was no longer a victim of her circumstances. She was a survivor, a woman who had fought for everything she had, and had emerged stronger for it. "Thank you," Sophie said softly, turning to Ethan. "For everything. I don't think I could have made it without you." Ethan's smile deepened, his eyes filled with warmth. "You never had to make it alone. We're in this together, always." As the days turned into weeks, Sophie continued to find her balance. She was still dedicated to her work, but she had learned the importance of taking time for herself. She spent more time with her family, with friends, and with Ethan, allowing herself to be present in the moments that mattered. It wasn't always easy. The shadows of the past would sometimes creep back in, but Sophie was learning to let go of the fear. She had survived the storm, and now she was learning to dance in the rain. Sophie had taken back control of her life, but more importantly, she had reclaimed herself. She had learned that true freedom wasn't just about surviving, it was about living. And as she looked ahead to the future, Sophie knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she was ready. She had the strength, the courage, and the love of those around her to face whatever came next. The fight for her life had made her stronger, and now it was time to embrace the life she had fought so hard to build. Sophie Langley was ready for whatever came next, and this time, she was living it on her terms. Asterisk. Sophie stood on the balcony of her apartment, overlooking the city she had spent so many years building, both in her career and in her personal life. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden hue over the skyline, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a deep sense of peace settle in her chest. The battle with Nathan Bennett had been fierce and tumultuous, but she had come out victorious, stronger, and more certain of her place in the world. Ethan had remained by her side throughout it all, offering quiet support and guidance. He had been more than a partner in business. He had been her rock. And now, as they stood together at the edge of a new chapter, Sophie knew that their bond was unbreakable. As the days passed, Sophie found herself reflecting on the journey she had been through. She had gone from a woman who had everything to a woman who had lost almost everything and back again. Her business empire had been threatened, her life had been nearly destroyed, and yet here she was, standing stronger than ever. The scars of the past were still there, but they no longer defined her. They were reminders of the fight she had won, of the resilience that had carried her through the darkest times. She had taken control of her life, and now she was ready to embrace the future. Sophie's relationship with her company was stronger than ever. She had made difficult decisions, reorganized, and streamlined the business. The team that remained after the chaos was loyal, and together, they were building something greater than ever before. The lessons she had learned about trust, resilience, and leadership had reshaped her approach to running the business. She was no longer just a CEO. She was a leader who understood the value of compassion, honesty, and integrity. But beyond the boardroom, Sophie had also started to reconnect with her personal life. She spent more time with her family and friends, rediscovered her hobbies, and even began dating again. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to be vulnerable, to experience life without constantly looking over her shoulder. It was a strange but welcome feeling. As the months went on, Sophie found herself growing in ways she hadn't expected. She had always been driven, focused on her career and the challenges in front of her, but now she realized that life was more than just work. It was about the people around her, the connections she made, and the experiences she could enjoy. Ethan continued to be her partner, not just in business, but in every part of her life. Their bond had deepened during the crisis, and they had come out the other side stronger than ever. Sophie couldn't imagine going through all of this without him. As they sat together one evening, enjoying a quiet dinner at home, Sophie turned to Ethan with a thoughtful expression. "You've been with me through everything," she said softly, "through the worst and the best. I don't know what I would have done without you." Ethan smiled, his eyes full of warmth. "I'd say the same about you, Sophie. You've shown me what true strength looks like. I'm proud of you, of everything you've accomplished." Sophie smiled, her heart swelling with affection. "We've both been through a lot, but I think we've come out stronger because of it. And now, we get to decide what happens next." Ethan's expression grew serious as he set his fork down. "What do you want, Sophie? What's next for you?" Sophie looked out the window at the bustling city below. "I want to keep growing both personally and professionally. But I also want to make sure I'm living the life I've fought for, not just surviving it. I want to find balance." Ethan nodded, understanding. "Balance is important. You deserve to have all the success and the happiness." Sophie's smile widened. "I'm not going to take it all for granted this time. I've learned that sometimes you have to slow down to appreciate what you have." The conversation shifted as they discussed their plans for the future. Sophie had new goals for her business, but she also wanted to help others, other women, especially who were facing the same battles she had. She wanted to use her platform and her success to empower others, to show them that no matter how dark the journey, there was always light at the end of the tunnel. Ethan supported her vision wholeheartedly, and together, they began to put plans into motion. Sophie started mentoring young entrepreneurs, speaking at events, and using her resources to fund projects that supported women in business. The more she gave back, the more fulfilled she felt. It wasn't just about building her empire anymore, it was about creating a legacy, one that would help others rise along with her. Weeks later, Sophie found herself on stage at a large conference, speaking in front of a crowd of ambitious women entrepreneurs. Her story, her journey, had become an inspiration to so many, and she felt an overwhelming sense of pride as she shared it with them. She spoke about the importance of resilience, of staying true to yourself, and of never giving up, no matter the odds. As the applause echoed through the hall, Sophie felt a deep sense of accomplishment. She had come full circle, from a woman who had almost lost everything, to one who had everything to give. Sophie's journey had taught her that no matter how hard life can be, it's never too late to start again, to rebuild, and to make a difference. As she walked off the stage, Ethan was there waiting for her, his smile full of pride. "You did it," he said, pulling her into a warm embrace. Sophie looked at him, her heart full of gratitude. "We did it," she corrected him, knowing that their partnership, their love, and their shared journey were the true sources of her strength. The future was uncertain, but Sophie knew one thing for sure. She was ready for whatever came next, and she was no longer afraid of the challenges ahead. She had faced the darkness and emerged into the light, stronger and more determined than ever. The best was yet to come, and Sophie Langley was ready to embrace it, on her terms. Asterisk. Months had passed since Sophie Langley stood on the stage at that conference, feeling like a new chapter of her life was unfolding. The weight of her past, the trauma, the fight for survival, and the rebuilding of her empire, All seemed distant now, though not forgotten. She had not only reclaimed her life, but was now thriving, focusing on the future and helping others in the process. Sophie had truly embraced her role as a mentor, helping women who were just beginning their own journeys to success. Her life had evolved into something she had once only dreamed of, and every moment seemed to reaffirm that she was on the right path. But as she sat in her office one evening, reflecting on how far she had come, she couldn't help but feel like there was still a piece of the puzzle missing. It wasn't that her career wasn't fulfilling. She had reclaimed her company and built it back stronger than ever. But Sophie had started to realize that true fulfillment was more than just professional success. It was about finding balance, about being present in her personal life, and about learning to appreciate the moments she had left behind in the pursuit of ambition. Sophie looked out the window at the city, the night lights twinkling in the distance. The calm was soothing, but her mind was racing. She had achieved what seemed impossible, yet a part of her still longed for something more, something beyond just her work, beyond just the daily grind of business. She needed to reconnect with herself, to rediscover the parts of life she had put on hold. Ethan had always been there for her, the steady force she could lean on. He had been her rock during the hardest times, and now, as their lives had settled into something more stable, Sophie felt the longing to deepen the relationship. Ethan was more than just a partner in business. He was her confidant, her supporter, and someone who had stood by her when everything else seemed to fall apart. Sophie had begun to realize that her feelings for Ethan had evolved. What had started as a strong partnership had deepened into something more meaningful. But she was still hesitant to confront it, unsure if the timing was right. One night, as they sat together in the living room, Ethan looked over at Sophie, sensing her thoughts. "You've been quiet tonight," he said, his voice gentle, his eyes full of understanding. Sophie looked up, her heart beating faster as she met his gaze. She knew this was the moment to speak up, to acknowledge the unspoken connection they shared. "I've been thinking a lot lately," Sophie started, her voice soft but steady. "About everything. What I want out of life, out of all of this. I've fought so hard to get here, but now I realize that it's not just about the business anymore. It's about what's next for me, for us." Ethan's eyes softened as he listened, his expression open, patient. "You don't have to have it all figured out, Sophie. You've done more than most people ever will. But if you want something more, something different, I'm here." Sophie's heart swelled with emotion as she heard his words. She had been afraid of acknowledging the deeper feelings she had for Ethan, but now, looking into his eyes, she knew she didn't have to be afraid anymore. "I want to explore this with you," Sophie confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want to be with you, not just as business partners, but as something more. I don't want to keep waiting, wondering what could be." Ethan reached out and took her hand, his touch reassuring. "I've been waiting for you to say that," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've always known we were meant for more than just business. And if you're ready, I'm ready too." Sophie felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had finally found the courage to be open about her feelings, and Ethan's response was everything she had hoped for. They sat together in silence for a few moments, the weight of the conversation settling in. Sophie realized that this was the beginning of something new, not just for her career, but for her personal life as well. The fight for control, the battle against Nathan, and the rebuilding of her company had all been necessary. But now, Sophie was ready to focus on her heart, on what it meant to truly live. The days following their conversation were filled with a renewed sense of purpose for Sophie. She found herself making more time for Ethan, for the things that made her happy outside of work. They spent weekends together, rediscovering the joy of simple moments. And as they grew closer, Sophie felt a sense of peace that had eluded her for so long. Her professional life continued to thrive, but now there was balance. She was able to devote time to her personal life, to relationships, and to self-care in ways she hadn't allowed herself before. The success of her business didn't define her anymore. What mattered was that she was living a life that was rich with meaning and connection. Sophie and Ethan also made time for their shared passion, supporting and empowering others. Together, they organized events, workshops, and mentorship programs, helping to give back to the community that had supported them along the way. It became a mission for them, not just to succeed, but to help others find their way to success and happiness, just as they had. Sophie was no longer just a survivor. She was a woman who had learned to live fully, to embrace her vulnerability, and to let others into her life. She had learned that the most important victories weren't just professional, they were personal. And as she looked ahead to the future, Sophie Langley knew she had everything she needed to face whatever came next, with strength, love, and the knowledge that she had created a life worth living. Asterisk, asterisk. As the months passed, Sophie Langley found herself reflecting on how much had changed. The once overwhelming pressure to rebuild had subsided, leaving behind a quiet sense of accomplishment. She had not only reclaimed her business, but had grown emotionally and mentally. Her relationship with Ethan had blossomed into something deeper, and the life she had built around her company now felt balanced and fulfilling. They spent more time together, finding joy in the simple things, whether it was quiet evenings at home or spontaneous trips to places they had always talked about visiting. Sophie knew that the fight against Nathan Bennett had shaped her, but it was the calm, the peace she had found with Ethan and herself that made her truly content. One sunny afternoon, as they sat in the park enjoying the serenity of the moment, Sophie looked at Ethan with a smile. "I used to think success was all about how much I could achieve in the business world," she said, her voice soft but filled with realization. "But now, I understand that true success is about the life I'm living now. It's about having people I care about, and who care about me, and doing work that feels meaningful." Ethan turned toward her, his eyes full of admiration. "You've built something incredible, Sophie. Not just in business, but in the life you're creating. You've found the balance you were looking for." Sophie's heart swelled as she took his hand in hers, her fingers gently interlacing with his. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said, the words coming from a deep place of gratitude. "You've been my constant through everything." Ethan squeezed her hand, his gaze softening. "I'll always be here, Sophie." Through the highs and the lows, Sophie smiled at him, her heart full of love. "I know," she replied, her voice thick with emotion, "and I'm finally ready to let go of the past and move forward. The pain, the struggles, they've made me who I am, but they don't define me anymore." The weight of everything that had happened over the past year had lifted, and Sophie could finally breathe without feeling the pressure of what had come before. She had faced her darkest moments, and now she was living in the light. Her relationship with Ethan had become more than just a partnership. It had become a true connection built on trust, love, and mutual respect. They had both learned the importance of balance, of taking the time to nurture not only their business, but their personal lives as well. They continued to support each other's growth, whether it was in the professional realm or in their personal endeavors. Sophie was still driven by the desire to make a difference, but now she understood the importance of nurturing her own happiness along the way. She continued to mentor other women, to share her story of resilience and strength, but she no longer saw herself as the survivor of a battle. She was thriving. One evening, as they sat together in their living room, sipping wine and talking about their future, Sophie glanced over at Ethan with a smile. "What do you think the future holds for us?" she asked, her eyes twinkling with excitement. Ethan looked thoughtful for a moment before answering. "I think we're on the right path," he said, his voice steady. "You've built something incredible, and we've both learned that the most important thing is to enjoy the journey. Whatever comes next, I know we'll face it together." Sophie leaned in, resting her head on his shoulder, feeling at peace. "I'm ready for whatever comes next, too," she whispered. "But for now, I'm just grateful for where we are." As they sat in the comfort of their home, the world outside seemed distant, and Sophie realized that everything she had worked for, everything she had fought through, had led her to this moment of clarity. She was no longer defined by the battles she had fought. She was defined by the strength she had found in herself, in her relationships, and in the future she was now building. The journey was far from over, but Sophie knew she was ready for whatever came next. She had taken back control of her life, and now she was living it on her own terms. She had everything she needed to succeed, not just in business, but in life. Sophie Langley was no longer the woman who had to fight to survive. She was the woman who had chosen to thrive, and the future was wide open, full of possibilities. As she closed her eyes, resting against Ethan, she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, she had the strength, the love, and the determination to face them. and she was no longer afraid. Asterisk. 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 As the months passed, Sophie Langley found herself settling into a new rhythm, a life that no longer revolved around the constant tension of the past. Her company was thriving, stronger than it had ever been, and her relationship with Ethan had deepened in ways she hadn't expected. Yet, despite the successes, there was an undercurrent of uncertainty that Sophie couldn't quite shake. The emotional toll of everything she had been through still lingered, even if she was no longer actively fighting. Sophie had spent so much time focusing on survival, on rebuilding what had been lost, that she hadn't allowed herself the time to truly heal. The weight of the past had become something she carried with her, whether she acknowledged it or not. One evening, as she sat alone in her office, reviewing the details of a new project, Sophie's mind wandered. She glanced at the photo on her desk, her mother's smiling face, a constant reminder of the love and support that had helped Sophie through her darkest moments. It was then that she realized something. She had never truly given herself the space to mourn, to process the loss of the life she had once known, and to embrace the joy of the life she had built. She had spent so much time pushing forward, focusing on what needed to be done, that she hadn't taken the time to just be. Sophie closed her eyes for a moment, allowing herself to reflect. The past few years had been nothing short of a roller coaster, full of unexpected twists and turns. She had fought so hard to reclaim control, but now that she had it, she realized she needed to find balance not just in her work, but in her heart. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She wanted to truly live. A soft knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. Ethan stepped inside, his presence as calming as always. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. Sophie looked up at him, her gaze soft. "I think it's time I take a step back," she said quietly. "I've been pushing so hard for so long. Maybe it's time to focus on something more than just work." Ethan's expression softened, and he nodded. "You've earned it, Sophie. You've been through so much, and now it's time to live for yourself, not just for the company." Sophie smiled faintly, feeling the weight of his words. For so long, she had been defined by her work, by the battles she had fought and won. But now, she realized that true fulfillment wasn't just in achievements or milestones. It was in the moments of stillness, in the quiet connections she had with the people around her, and in allowing herself to feel joy. "I'm going to take some time off," Sophie said, her voice steady. "I need to reconnect with myself, with what truly matters. I've been so focused on survival that I forgot to live." Ethan smiled warmly, his eyes filled with understanding. "I think that's a great idea," he said. "You deserve it. And when you're ready, you'll be even stronger, not just in your work, but in everything else." Sophie took a deep breath, feeling a sense of peace wash over her. The future was still uncertain, but she was no longer afraid. She had fought for her life, her career, and her happiness. Now, it was time to embrace the joy of simply being. In the weeks that followed, Sophie made a conscious effort to step away from the daily grind. She spent more time with her friends, reconnecting with old relationships that had been put on hold for far too long. She took long walks in the park, enjoyed quiet afternoons at home, and even started traveling again. The world, which had once seemed so overwhelming, now felt full of possibility. She began to rediscover the things that had once brought her joy: the art of cooking, the peace of a good book, the thrill of exploring new places. She allowed herself to laugh more, to let go of the fear that had once controlled her every decision. As she explored new places, Sophie realized that the world was much larger than the bubble she had built around herself. There was so much more to experience, and she wasn't going to miss it. She also spent more time with Ethan, strengthening the bond they shared. The connection they had built through their business partnership had grown into something much more. They had supported each other through the hardest moments, and now they were building a life together. Sophie realized that the love she had for Ethan was not just a byproduct of their shared experiences, but something deeper, something that had always been there, even when she hadn't been able to see it. One evening, after returning from a trip to the coast, Sophie found herself sitting with Ethan on their balcony, watching the sunset. It was a moment of quiet contentment, one that Sophie knew she would remember for a long time. "I've been thinking," Sophie said softly, turning to Ethan, "about everything, about how far we've come. I never thought I could be this happy after everything that happened. Ethan reached for her hand, his fingers gently entwining with hers. You deserve all of this, Sophie. You've fought for it, and now it's time to enjoy it. Sophie smiled, her heart full. I think I'm finally starting to understand that. For the first time in a long time, Sophie felt truly at peace. She had faced her darkest moments and come out stronger, but now she was learning how to enjoy the life she had worked so hard to build. The future was still full of unknowns, but Sophie was no longer afraid of the challenges ahead. She had the strength, the love, and the resilience to face whatever came next. Sophie Langley was no longer just surviving, she was living, and for the first time, that felt like enough. Asterisk, asterisk. As the months rolled on, Sophie Langley continued to embrace the peace she had found. Her decision to step back from the relentless pace of work and focus on what truly mattered had brought a sense of clarity she hadn't realized she needed. The personal time she had carved out for herself had allowed her to heal, both physically and emotionally. She felt more connected to herself, to Ethan, and to the life she had built. With each passing day, she began to understand that the real victory wasn't just in surviving the hardships she'd faced, it was in thriving despite them. Sophie and Ethan had become inseparable, and their bond had deepened. It wasn't just their shared success that brought them together. It was the quiet moments they spent enjoying each other's company. They no longer felt the pressure of a ticking clock or an overwhelming to-do list. They simply lived in the present, savoring the time they had. They often spent weekends exploring new places, short road trips to the coast, hiking in the mountains, or simply wandering through small towns they had never visited before. Sophie had rediscovered a love for travel she had lost in the chaos of her career, and Ethan was right there beside her, making every adventure more memorable. But it wasn't just travel that had brought joy back into Sophie's life. She had started to focus on personal projects that were deeply meaningful to her. One of the most significant was a mentorship program she had started for young women in business. Sophie had always believed in the power of education and empowerment, and now she was in a position to give back. She worked with a group of women who were just starting their own journeys, offering advice, guidance, and a platform for them to thrive. The fulfillment she felt from helping others grow was immeasurable. Through the program, Sophie was able to make a real difference, not just in her industry, but in the lives of those she mentored. Her work became a source of inspiration and connection, further reinforcing the importance of living a balanced life. Despite her success and newfound sense of purpose, Sophie knew that challenges would always be a part of her journey. No one could predict what the future held, but she was no longer afraid of what lay ahead. She had learned to trust herself, her instincts, and the people around her. She had come to understand that life was not about avoiding challenges, but about learning how to face them with strength and grace. One afternoon, as Sophie sat in her office, reviewing the progress of her mentorship program, she felt a sense of deep satisfaction. Her company was thriving, her relationships were flourishing, and she was finally at peace. It was at that moment that Ethan walked in, holding a small envelope in his hand. "You've got a letter," he said, his tone light but with a hint of curiosity. Sophie looked up, taking the envelope from him. "A letter?" she said, raising an eyebrow. "Who could be writing to me?" As she opened the envelope, she found a beautifully written note inside, the handwriting elegant and familiar. It was from her mother, who had passed away years ago. The letter was short but filled with love and encouragement. It was a reminder of everything Sophie had fought for and achieved. Her mother's words were a simple but powerful message. "I am so proud of you, Sophie. Never forget to be kind to yourself, for you have already given so much to the world." Sophie felt tears welling up in her eyes as she read the words, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to grieve, to feel the loss of the woman who had always believed in her. Ethan, sensing the emotional shift, quietly sat beside her, offering his support. He didn't need to say anything, he simply held her hand, providing the comfort Sophie needed in that moment. "I miss her," Sophie whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I miss her so much." Ethan squeezed her hand gently. "I know you do, but she's always with you, Sophie. In everything you do, in the way you inspire others, she's there." Sophie nodded, the tears flowing freely now. She had been so focused on rebuilding her life, on surviving, that she had neglected to process the grief of losing her mother. But now, with the letter in her hands, Sophie felt a sense of closure. She could feel her mother's presence, and she realized that, in many ways, she had already honored her mother's legacy by becoming the strong, determined woman she was today. The rest of the afternoon was spent in quiet reflection, and as the day drew to a close, Sophie felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. She was ready to embrace whatever came next, knowing that she had the strength to face it. With Ethan by her side, her company flourishing, and her heart full of love and gratitude, Sophie felt that she was finally in a place where she could live fully without fear, without regret, and without hesitation. As the sun set outside her office, Sophie Langley realized that her journey was far from over, but for the first time in her life, she was ready to live it without looking over her shoulder, fully embracing the life she had fought so hard to build. Asterisk. As the weeks turned into months, Sophie Langley's life had reached a new rhythm, one of balance, fulfillment, and joy. The lingering pain from the past was still there, but it no longer had the power to dictate her every move. She had spent so long running from it, fighting to rebuild and reclaim what had been taken from her, but now, she was finally allowing herself to experience life fully. Sophie was not just surviving, she was thriving. Her relationship with Ethan had blossomed into something beautiful, deep, and fulfilling. They had spent countless hours talking, laughing, and discovering new sides to each other, forming a bond stronger than ever. Their partnership was no longer just about business, it was about shared dreams, mutual respect, and unwavering support. Sophie knew she had found someone who understood her completely, someone who was there not just for the triumphs, but also for the struggles. Together, they had become a team, not just in the office but in life. Professionally, Sophie's company had flourished. She had built it back from the brink of collapse. But it was now thriving in ways she had never imagined. Her leadership had shifted, becoming more inclusive, compassionate, and focused on empowering others. She had grown not just as a businesswoman, but as a person, learning the importance of balance, listening to her team, and being present in every moment. One day, while going through some company reports, Sophie found herself smiling. She realized that she had built a legacy, one that would stand the test of time. Her work was making a difference, but it was the impact she had on others that brought her the most satisfaction. She had used her platform to mentor young women, to share her story, and to help them achieve their own dreams. That, Sophie realized, was her true success. As she looked at the calendar, Sophie realized that it had been a year since everything had changed: the accident, Nathan Bennett's betrayal, and the long road to recovery. In that year, Sophie had transformed. She had fought the hardest battles of her life, and now, she was standing in a place of peace and strength. Yet, there was one thing Sophie had always wanted to do that she hadn't made the time for: travel. During the chaos, she had put her personal dreams on hold, but now, with the company in a strong position and her personal life flourishing, Sophie felt it was time to take the leap and explore the world. She turned to Ethan one evening after dinner, a thoughtful look on her face. "I've been thinking about something," Sophie said softly. Ethan raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What's on your mind?" Sophie smiled, feeling the excitement building within her. "I want to travel. I've always dreamed of seeing the world, but I've never made it a priority. I've been so focused on my career and everything else. But now, I think it's time." Ethan's face lit up with a warm smile. "I think that's an amazing idea. You've earned it, Sophie. We've both been through so much, and now it's time to enjoy the world. Where do you want to go?" Sophie thought for a moment. There were so many places she had always wanted to visit. The beaches of Greece, the historical sites in Italy, the vibrant streets of Tokyo. The list was endless, but one place had always stood out: an adventure she had always dreamed of. "I've always wanted to visit the islands in the South Pacific," Sophie said, her eyes sparkling. "The beauty, the culture, the people, it's something I've always wanted to experience." Ethan nodded, clearly on board. "Then let's make it happen." With that, they started planning their trip. Sophie felt a sense of excitement that she hadn't felt in years. This was more than just a vacation. It was a chance to live fully, to experience the world in ways she never had the time for. They booked their flights, planned their itinerary, and soon, Sophie was looking forward to a new adventure. In the weeks leading up to the trip, Sophie's sense of anticipation only grew. The idea of exploring new places, tasting new foods, and meeting new people filled her with a sense of wonder. This trip was a way to mark the beginning of a new chapter in her life, one where she no longer felt like she was just surviving, but truly living. The day they left for their adventure, Sophie felt a rush of freedom. The plane soared into the sky, and as she looked out the window at the vast expanse of the world below, she felt a sense of excitement and possibility. This was just the beginning. The couple's first stop was a small, secluded island in the South Pacific. It was everything Sophie had imagined: crystal clear waters, pristine beaches, and a pace of life that was slower and more relaxed than she had ever experienced. They spent their days swimming, exploring, and immersing themselves in the culture of the island. Sophie learned to surf, something she had always wanted to try, and Ethan was right by her side, encouraging her every step of the way. For the first time in a long time, Sophie didn't think about the business, the challenges, or the struggles she had faced. She just lived in the moment. After a week on the island, Sophie and Ethan traveled to other parts of the South Pacific, each place offering new experiences and memories. From vibrant markets in Fiji to quiet hikes in New Zealand, every moment felt like a gift. Sophie had always worked hard, but now she was learning how to play just as hard. One evening, as they sat on a balcony overlooking the ocean, Sophie looked at Ethan, her heart full of contentment. "This is what I've been missing," she said, her voice filled with awe. "This sense of peace, of living in the moment, of not worrying about anything except what's right in front of me. I've needed this for so long." Ethan smiled and took her hand in his. "You've earned it, and now, it's time for us to enjoy it together." Sophie smiled back, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. She had fought for everything she had, but now she realized that the most precious moments in life were the ones she shared with the people she loved. The journey they had been on had been long and challenging, but it had led them to this moment together, free and ready for whatever came next. Sophie Langley had finally learned that life wasn't just about surviving, it was about living, and she was living it to the fullest, with love, adventure, and an open heart. Asterisk, asterisk. As the months passed, Sophie Langley and Ethan continued to explore the world together, soaking in new experiences, expanding their horizons, and deepening their bond. Their journey through the South Pacific had been the beginning of a new chapter in their lives, one marked by peace, freedom, and a deeper understanding of what truly mattered. With each passing day, Sophie found herself growing more comfortable in her own skin, no longer defined by the battles she had fought in the past but by the life she was building in the present. She had spent so much of her life focusing on survival and success, but now she realized that true happiness came from embracing every moment, living with intention, and letting go of the pressures she had once placed on herself. One quiet evening, as Sophie and Ethan sat by the fire on a secluded beach, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and orange, Sophie took a deep breath, feeling the cool ocean breeze on her skin. It was one of those rare, perfect moments where time seemed to stand still. She turned to Ethan, a peaceful smile on her face. "I never imagined I would find peace like this," she said softly, her voice filled with gratitude. Ethan looked at her, his gaze full of affection. "You've been through so much, Sophie. But now, you've found what you've always needed: the ability to just live, to enjoy life and everything it offers. And I'm proud of you for it." Sophie felt a wave of emotion wash over her. For so long, she had been chasing something, trying to fill a void. But now, sitting there with Ethan, with the ocean stretching out before them and the sound of the waves gently lapping at the shore, Sophie knew she had everything she needed. "I've spent so many years focused on the wrong things," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Chasing after success, trying to prove myself, to rebuild everything I thought I had lost. But I've come to realize that none of that matters if you don't take the time to truly live. I spent so much time trying to survive that I forgot to actually live." Ethan smiled, his hand reaching out to gently take hers. "You've learned that lesson now, and that's what matters." Sophie nodded, squeezing his hand. "I think the most important thing I've learned is that life is about balance, about finding joy in the everyday moments, not just the big victories. It's about cherishing the people around you, nurturing those relationships, and remembering to enjoy the journey, not just the destination. Ethan's eyes softened as he looked at her. "You've found a peace I think we both needed, and now we have the rest of our lives ahead of us to explore it together." Sophie smiled, her heart full of warmth. She felt a deep sense of contentment, knowing that she had finally found the balance she had been searching for. It wasn't about the company she had built or the battles she had won. It was about the love she shared with Ethan, the joy of discovering new places, and the fulfillment of helping others along the way. As they watched the stars begin to twinkle in the night sky, Sophie knew that their journey wasn't over. They still had so much to explore, so much to give, and so much to experience together. But for the first time in her life, Sophie felt ready for whatever came next. The lessons she had learned, the strength she had gained, and the love she had found would carry her forward into the future. And no matter where that journey took them, Sophie Langley was ready to embrace it fully, knowing that life was not just about surviving, it was about living, truly living, and sharing that joy with the people she loved. As she leaned her head against Ethan's shoulder, Sophie smiled, feeling at peace. The past had shaped her, but it was the present and the promise of the future that she had now come to cherish. Sophie had fought for her life, for her happiness, and for the people she cared about. Now, she was living the life she had always dreamed of, full of adventure, love, and the kind of peace that came from finally accepting herself, her journey, and everything she had worked so hard to build. And with Ethan by her side, Sophie knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together, with open hearts and a willingness to embrace the unknown. For Sophie, this was just the beginning. The future was wide open, and she was ready to make the most of every moment.